Okay, so we are continuing from yesterday, and we left off yesterday with discussing the idea of the derech arucha v'kitzara, the longer, shorter way. And what we said is that Chabad is known as the longer, shorter way. And the reason why it is known as the longer, shorter way is because at first it seems like you're never going to get there. That's really the idea. It's long. It looks long at first, but in fact, it's a pathway that is well trodden, and it's a pathway that you will get there. You will get there in the end, like the Gemara says about how the rabbi was trying to get to Yerushalayim, and he met the child in the street, and the child said, "Do you want to go in the shorter way, the shorter, longer way, or the longer, shorter way?" And he said that this was one of the only times in his life that he was bested in a verbal discussion, and he was bested by a child, because he thought that when the child said the shorter way, meaning the shorter, longer way, that the main word was the shorter way, i.e., that was the first word that was given, and he went in that direction. And of course, as we discussed yesterday, he ran into a bunch of vineyards and thorns and everything. So as much as he was able to see Yerushalayim, it was right there, he wasn't able to get there. And he came back to the fork on the road, and he changed, and he went to the longer way, the longer, shorter way. And as much as it was a winding trip here, there, and everywhere, he finally arrived. The same thing with Chabad Hasidus. The Chabad Hasidic way is a way of slowly but surely changing your mitzias, changing your being, changing how I look at life, right? That is the goal. The goal is to slowly but surely re-evaluate what the world is telling me. And when the world tells me one thing, I have to look at it and I have to see it again, and I have to say, wait a minute. As much as this is what it looks like on the surface, let's go deeper. Let's delve into it and see what it's really trying to tell me. That is what Tanya is trying to explain to us. Tanya is trying to explain to us, as I heard one time, we were Bachrim, we were students back in the yeshiva in Israel, talking about probably 30 years ago. And we were sitting around the table, and we were trying to say, how could you, if you were to market Hasidus, what would you say? What would be your one-liner? What is Hasidus? And something that one of my friends said at the time that it stuck with me all these years is that Hasidus is all about looking at something one time and recognizing that whatever you saw the first time is not the emes. You have to look at it one time, and then you turn around and you look at it again, and you go deeper. You go deeper into everything, because everything in the world that we see has this superficial appearance. And we have to recognize that the superficial appearance, whether we're dealing with the physical world, whether we're dealing with relationships, whether we're dealing with even our relationship with God, is much deeper than what it appears to be in the beginning. Okay, so that is the basic title page. Now, from here, we go into the first chapter of Tanya, and let's talk about a GPS of the first 25 chapters of Tanya for a second, right? Or a map of what's going on. The first chapter of Tanya begins and really is divided in half. And what you can say is that the first half of the first chapter is really all about trying to show us the Chabad approach with regards to even learning Torah. In other words, up until this point of time, we have the concept called Nigla of Torah, which is the revealed aspects of Torah, and we have the Sod, the Pnimius of Torah, the Kabbalistic approach to Torah. And the 2 points are very much in 2 different forms. And either you're learning Nigla or you're learning Pnimius, and it's not going in between. However, the Alter Rebbe begins a discussion in the first chapter by showing us that, in fact, they're really very much meshed. And it's really one Torah. How do we see that? What we see is in the description, right away from the beginning of the Tanya, he shows us that there are 3 types of people, essentially. A tzaddik, like we talked about yesterday, a beinoni, and a rasha. Right? And usually, if we were to ask ourselves, what are the definitions? So the practical definitions, you say a tzaddik is someone who is 51% good, a rasha is someone who is 51% bad, and a beinoni is someone who's in between, he is 50-50, right? And that sounds all well and good until the Alter Rebbe brings a Zohar right in the beginning of Tanya, which says that in Raya Mehemna Parashas Mishpatim, he says that tzaddik v'ralo shahara shabo kafuf l'Torah, that the ra, the evil that's in him, is kafuf, is bent to the good, which implies that at no point of time does a rasha ever express anything that's evil. Excuse me, thank you. A tzaddik, he never expresses anything that's evil. So now, all of a sudden, that's a very different definition. Because now, if we're talking about in terms of practically how he interfaces with the world, we're saying that a tzaddik is really 100% good. And if you're not 100% good, then you're not a tzaddik. So that's very nice. And we could say, well, those are the guys that are learning Kabbalah, Zayar, that we'll put them on this category. But then there's the normal people, right? The rest of us, we learn revealed aspects of Torah, and we say, look, you're getting it all wrong. It's 51% is a tzaddik, 51% bad, right, is a rasha, and then you have this 50-50 guy in between. And what the Alter Rebbe then proceeds to show us is he brings example after example after example of places in Nigla, places in the revealed part of the Torah that use the exact same description as the Zohar does. So now we run into a problem. Our problem is that we can no longer define it as, okay, well, the Pnimius of the Torah, the Kabbalah has one definition, and the Nigla of the Torah has another definition, because time and time again, the Nigla is going along with the Kabbalistic definition.
What is Nigla?
Nigla means the revealed aspects of the Torah, like the Gemara and the Mishnah. So the Alter Rebbe concludes that really what we have here is that it's really one Torah. And you must learn Nigla and you must learn Pnimis Torah. And that, in fact, is one of the interesting points where we start the Tanya with the words Tanya, Besof Perek Gimel Denida, right? It's Tanya, it was taught. Besof Perek Gimel Denida, at the end of the third chapter of Nida, Mashpi Mosati Tzadik V'Alti Rasha, you swear, made to swear that you'll be a tzaddik and not a rasha. Now, if you look up in Masechtas Nida, and you go and you find over there, you're going to see that this quote is actually a quote of a rabbi named Rabbi Simlai. Now, if you look throughout Shas, you will find that Rabbi Simlai is an Amara. So what's the problem? So how could you say Tanya? Tanya means it was taught in a brisa. A brisa is a Tanaic teaching that was not included in the Mishnah. Tanaic means the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, who lived before the rabbis of the Amara, which are Amoraim, right, of the rabbis of the Gemara. Now, this is a very unusual situation, and some people want to say, well, there were really two Rabbi Simlois, and this was a Tana, this was an Amara. But even if so, why would the Alter Rebbe use such an obscure text of the Gemara if everyone has this on their shelves and everyone has a Shas on their shelf? They look at the Gemara and they're not going to see that. So, okay, fine. Maybe there is one obscure source that has it as Tanya. So Hasidim want to teach that the idea of Tanya is actually that there is a klipa, there is a negative force called Tanya. And this negative force is a force that tries to teach people and tries to influence people that they should not learn the inner aspects of the Torah. And therefore, in order to break this negative force, the Alter Rebbe chose to use this obscure language. And in fact, no one in the entire Jewish world calls this book Likutei Amorim. Right? We saw on this title page, what is it called? According to the title page, it's called Likutei Amorim. So why don't we ever call it that? Because it became known as Tanya. And if you ask anyone in the world, did you learn today Likutei Amorim? They'll say, what? Who? Did you learn today Tanya? Oh, Tanya. Yeah, I know Tanya. Right? So there are actually a number of different reasons why he started with the word Tanya, but for now, this is an important point that I want to bring out. So the idea was to break this klipa, break this negative force, and to recognize that it's all one Torah. And that's what he does from here, essentially, until about here. And then he ends with a concept an idea that really, that tzaddik, there's an essential definition of what a tzaddik is. There's an essential definition of what a rasha is, and an essential definition of what a beinoni is. And then there's a borrowed term that is used. So what's the difference? The essential title of what tzaddik means is someone whose soul came from a very high level in the upper worlds, and when it came down into this world, it overpowers the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, and also the body. And therefore, as we talked about in yesterday's class, the battles that it has in this world are very different from the battles that most normal people have. And then there's everyone else. So why do you call it a beinoni versus a rasha? If you look from the outside, a beinoni and a rasha, they look very, very different. But on the inside, they look the same. In other words, a beinoni and a rasha have the same fight all day long. The difference is that the beinoni wins. The beinoni is Superman. It's the greatest person that you could possibly be. Because you know who he's in charge of? He's able to be in charge of the only person that you're in the entire world that you are able to be in charge of, which is myself. And that's the difference. So now that we've decided that is the essential definition of what tzaddik, beinoni, and rasha means. So let's just go over that. Tzaddik is someone who is 100% doing good things, doing mitzvahs. And his avoda, like we described yesterday from the Chumash, is he's working on the little little itsy bitsy things that are off a little bit in his emotions, his intellect, his will, and his pleasure source in the soul. Then you have everyone else, and then that everyone else is split into two different parts. There's everyone else, and then there's a few superheroes amongst us that are able to actually control ourselves. Where they control ourselves? In the areas that we talked about in yesterday's class. Thought, speech, and action. Those are the areas they control themselves. Now we're done. We're done with the introduction, and we dive right in. So now the Alter Rebbe goes and says, okay, let's just make it clear. Every one of us has two souls. A godly soul and an animal soul. So which are we going to talk about first?
Animal.
The animal soul. We're going to mention the animal soul first. Why? Because our godly soul was having a great time in Shemayim. It came down here with a purpose. There's a mission that our godly soul has. And that mission is to develop, to change, to elevate our animal soul. And since the animal soul is really the first soul that's, so to speak, revealed in my body, that's what I'm living with constantly, right? The godly soul comes in at the same time. It's just it's not revealed. The godly soul gets a little bit of a revelation when we have a bris milah, in the 8th day, which is why, by the way, for girls who obviously do not have a bris milah, right, our tradition is that we give them a name as soon as possible. Right, one of my daughters, she was born at like 8 o'clock in the morning. We had a minyan at 9 o'clock that day with Torah reading. So all of a sudden, the nurse said to my wife, "Where did your husband disappear to? Where is he? Where did he go?" So no, don't worry. He'll be back. He just had to do something. He had to take care of something. So what did I do? I had to run to the shul, run to the yeshiva, and to name her as quickly as possible. Why? Because we want a little bit of that godly soul to come in as soon as possible. So when we name a girl by the Torah, right away, her godly soul begins to become more revealed. And then when we have for a boy, when he has an upshernish, right, when we cut the long hair, right, for the first time in the third birthday, and when we start teaching him Aleph Beis, and then obviously it all culminates with the bar mitzvah when it comes in. Fully revealed. But all along that time, the animal soul has been camping out and becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, which is why we have so many habits and so many things that we have to work on. So that's what's mentioned first. But now that we mentioned it first, he says, okay, let's get to facts. So here we go. Chapters 2, 3, 4, 5 are all about the godly soul. 2, what is the essence of a godly soul? The essence of a godly soul is a chelik eloka mimal ma. A chelik, a piece of God Himself, which is inside of each one of us. That is our essence. That is who we are. A piece of God Himself. Right? We have it inside of each one of us. Hold on one second. We have a piece of God inside of us that is shining inside of each one of us, and that is our purest essence of who we are, right from the depth of who our being is. That's it. That's who we are. How do you bring this infinite being into little old me, into finite me? This is an incredible experience that we're all tapping into at any moment of our life. But this is what is coming into our inside. Once we realize that, we can go to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is, well, how do I look? What do I look like? What do I have? So I have 3 intellectual powers, right? Which are my chachma. Chachma literally means like the spark that goes off in a person's head, right? Bina, which is that takes the spark and then develops it, brings it out into all the details. So where do I get my information from? My information can come from one of 2 places into my chachma. Either it comes from something I'm hearing outside, I go to a lecture, I read a book, something like that. Or I also have, inside of me, I have an infinite or close to infinite source of information called the Kayach HaMaskil. Question is, how do I tap into this Kayach HaMaskil? The way I tap into the Kayach HaMaskil is I have to empty my cup. What does that mean? It means that when all of a sudden I get a piece of Gemara, or I get a piece of Tanya, and I'm trying to focus on it, I'm trying to figure it out, and what happens? I go through all the different patterns that I have in my mind of how to learn this, and I get very frustrated because I can't figure this out. Right? That's what happens with all of us. We get a math problem, and we're trying to figure out, wow, gosh, how can I do it? And all of a sudden, we become what is known as bittul. We become like nullified in ourselves. We become frustrated. We become upset. We can't figure it out. We can't do anything. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a lightning bolt comes into our heads. I think I got the information. Can't do that, right? Right? I got the information. But at that moment, do I really have it? I got it, but I don't got it at the same time. Did you ever hear that? In other words, when you first hear something in a lecture, you hear something in a Gemara class, or you hear something, and you, I think that makes sense. That makes sense. But like you got it, but you don't got it at the same time. You want it, but it's there, but it's not there. So what do I need to do? I need to now break it apart. I have to make it mine. Right now, it's not mine. It's in a state of what we call kayach ma, the power of what, right? That's chachma, changing around the letters. Like I got it and I don't got it at the same time. It happens with everything in our lives. Whenever we find out, whenever we read anything, whenever we hear something, then what we need to do is we need to break it down into pieces. I always use this example that when I was growing up, I had some friends that whenever they get like a toy or something like that, or anything, They get it, they bring it home, and immediately what would be the first thing they do? They take the whole thing apart and break it into little pieces. They say, oh, this is how it works. For me, I wasn't really that type of person, but I was more into playing, football and baseball and things like that. But these guys, they have to break it into every little piece. That's Bina. Oh, now it makes sense to me. This piece of Gemara, I thought I understood it. And you see it every time when anyone that's learning a piece of Gemara or learning a Tosfos, you sort of got the question, you sort of got the answer, you're not really, then you have to think through it. You have to think it through. What is it? What is really the question? What was bothering Tosfos? Why does he ask this question? That's what it is. That's what it is. That's Bina. It's Bina. And then we have to take the longest trip in the entire world. The trip goes through what is known as the Meitzer Hagaron, the thinness, the narrowness of my throat. Because I have to get it from my brain into my heart, into my emotions. That is what is known as internalizing. And that is the hardest trip of it all. And that's called Das. Das is the idea of focus, the idea of making a bridge between all the things that I have in my mind and into my emotions, so I can now act upon it. And then we have our 6 emotions, mainly stemming from the idea of chesed, or kindness, or giving on the one hand, but you could give so much that it's like overwhelming. And then there's the idea of gvura on the other side, holding back. Stop. So is chesed good or bad? Both. Is gvura good or bad? Both, obviously. Tiferes, a nice mixture between the two, right? Yes. And then going further and further until finally you get into, after the 6 emotions, we can get into malchus. Malchus is actualizing something, whether it's bringing it into speech, whether it's bringing it into action, whether it's however you are going to manifest this thing. That's all chapter 3. So that's how my soul looks. That's what it's made up of. So it's not my essence, but that's how I am. Chapter 4. Chapter 4 means, how do I interface with the world around me? In terms of things that are lower than me, action. Right? That's the easiest thing to control, the easiest thing. Just don't punch the guy next to you. Control yourself.
With Moshe, it's not so easy.
I know. Sometimes that's where it goes, Right? Then you have speech. Speech is a higher level up, right? And then you have thought. The hardest thing to control. But what do we see from this whole thing? Our thoughts, our speech, and our action are not us. Even our intellect and our emotions are not really us. We're deeper than that. Although in Tanya it does talk about the idea of the intellect and the emotions being the essence of the soul, or the main soul, but in a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe in Torah Or, he talks about it as really that the intellect and the emotions are really the ornaments. Really the essence of the soul is much deeper than that, and that's really who you are. With this in mind, you could see, even the way you live your life, right? It's why does the Alter Rebbe call it the garments of the soul, the thought, speech, and action? Because these are things that you could change. If you don't like what you see, then you have to change it. And you can change it. Starting with your actions, the easiest thing to change. How do you act towards people? How do you act in a day-to-day basis? What are you doing? What are you saying? What's coming out of your mouth? Is it positive? Is it negative? You could be a person that's constantly talking about other people, constantly bringing out the negativity, and you make it becomes more and more and more of your reality, but it's not really your reality. It's something that you could change if you chose to. And similarly with your thoughts. Now, how do I control my thoughts? So the worst thing to do is say, I'm not going to think. But now, what do you do? Okay, so we're going to try something here. For the next 10 seconds, no one think about a purple elephant. Ready? Here we go.
Too late.
Start. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, who is able to do it? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, how are you able to do it?
Yellow dog.
How are you able to do it? Oh, you thought about something. You think about something else. That's right. The only way to control your thoughts, according to Hasidus, is put your mind onto something else. If you put your mind on something else, you can control it. That means you have to be actively involved. But your thoughts, you have to remember, are not you. You are not your thoughts. And therefore, you have to take control of your thoughts. because otherwise your thoughts are just going to overwhelm you.
So my
And that's
thoughts,
what
my
it is.
speech, my actions, taken together, are still not me.
They're not you. They are how you interface. I've been using that word a lot today for some whatever reason with the world,
Right.
with the people around you, but they're not you.
The core, so the core is the
But
soul.
the core is for sure the soul. That's right, 100%. But the question is, if you recognize that that's not you, so then you also recognize that you could change it at any moment, and that's really what this book is about. We're really out of time. But let me just finish up with this one point, and then we'll pick up from here tomorrow.
Excuse me, why do we have short classes about this?
Why do we have short classes about this? I don't know. Speak to the people that organize the. But now we're organizing a YouTube channel, so we're going to be able to do this more often. But the point being what? The point being that what the Alter Rebbe is saying here in Tanya is that it's all about the goal. What's the goal? The goal is to change how you interface, how you express yourself, how you interact with the world around you, and even with yourself. In other words, my goal is not to change my essence. My goal is not to change my core. My goal is that at any given moment, I can change myself in a way of elevating my actions, my speech, and my thought, which means I could elevate the things that I am interacting with in the world, the people I'm interacting with in the world, and even with the way I look at the world and look at the people in my life and the way I look at myself. That's what it's about. How do I do that? So he starts to explain at the end of chapter 4, it's through Torah and mitzvahs. God has given us a pathway in which to use. The pathway is Torah and mitzvahs. That's how to do it. Okay? So, but it's really, really essential to remember this point, because at any given point in your day, that moment is the most important moment. And at any given moment, you could just change like that. You could switch things. You could make things positive. You can make things in a way that, even if for the last 3 hours you were doing something that you really think is a pretty dumb thing to do, right? Right now, I could change. What happened 3 hours ago, what happened even 30 seconds ago, is not relevant, because right now is what counts. And moving forward, I could do that. I could change that.
Keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward. That's it. That's what it's all about. Keep moving forward. Now, we're going to discuss a little bit later on. There is a time to reflect also. It's not just that we said, oh, I was acting there and I was doing this, 3 hours ago or 2 hours ago or 30 seconds ago, and just forget about it in life. But I have to be the one to set the agenda of when I'm going to reflect on it. Pardon?
At night.
Yes. And I'm going to be able to look at that and use it as a lesson to move forward in the future. But right now, right, while the chips are still on the table, I got to play my cards. Can't be worried about what happened, 3 hands ago, to use that as a muscle. Okay? All right, guys, that's it for today. We'll continue Mirz Hashem tomorrow.